Shalom Aleichem, welcome back to our series on the Rambam's 13 Principles of Faith. We already had our introduction last week. This week we're going to do principle number 1, and of course before we do anything, we're going to dedicate this episode in memory of two very special people, Leah Bat Mazal Tov, who was our mutual auntie, and our mutual cousin, Yoel Avram ben Nissim Betzivia. Okay.
So in this episode, we're going to deal with the first principle, which is to believe in the existence of the Creator. And we're going to look at the approach of, or perspective of Rambam and perhaps a few other historic scholars to look at different perspectives of different avenues that lead to the belief in gods or the knowledge of gods. And we'll look at things like from a scientific point of view. But first, maybe let's start with the actual text of the first principle as it appears in Perek Chelek, the introduction to Perek Chelek that Rambam wrote, where he lays out his 13 principles. Again, we're going to do one principle per episode. So I guess let's begin.
Okay. So the first principle is to believe in the existence of the Creator, Baruch Hu, may be blessed, and that is that there is a being complete in all the ways of existence. He is the cause of the existence, how we call it in Hebrew, the Sibat HaSibot, of all other things in existence. Through him does their existence survive, and from him is their survival. So you can see Hashem he didn't just create, he is intimately involved in all aspects of creation, and he always will be. And one cannot imagine the lack of his existence, since in the lack of his existence, the existence of all things dissolves, and no thing's existence will survive. That's what we call tohu vavohu, like in creation, properly translated as nullness and void. And if we were to imagine the lack of all other things in existence besides him, the existence of God, may be blessed, would not dissolve and not be diminished. Unity and mastery only belong to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, since he suffices in his own existence. It's not enough for Hashem to be by himself, and he doesn't need the existence of anything else. And everything besides him, of the angels and the bodies of the planets and what is in them and what is below them, all need Hashem for their existence. And this is the first principle, and it is indicated by the first of the 10 commandments, which is Ani Hashem Elohechem, I am the Lord your God, which is from Sefer Shemot, chapter 20, verse 2.
So we know that Rambam, Maimonides, was a rationalist, and he based his philosophy of the existence of God. He states a way to understand God or to know that there is a God in his Hilchot, Mishnah Torah, Hilchot Yesodei HaTorah, laws of the foundations of Torah, in the Sefer Amada of his magnificent Magnus Opus, the Mishnah Torah. And there, in the very first Mishnah of the very first book, he writes, the foundation of all foundations and the pillar of all wisdom is to know that there is a first being who brings everything into existence. So he emphasizes to know rather than to believe. And here he highlights that belief in God must be based on logical proof and not just blind faith. And he was a student of of Aristotle and his theories in metaphysics. And based on that, I think it's the first 6 halachas after the first one, which is to know that there is a first being, are subtly influenced by some of that philosophy. So there were three main um, philosophical points. Number one, that God is a necessary existence, that everything in the universe is contingent. That means dependent on something else for its existence. And if you go back in a chain of in a chain, um, ultimately it's not infinite. Ultimately, there has to be one original existence that everything else is spawned from or is formed from. And this is God, according to Maimonides. The second philosophical principle is something that is close to what Aristotle's theory of the unmoved mover. It's Hashem as the prime mover concept. So Rambam argues that if everything is in motion and there must be an original source of movement and motion in the universe, and this is a proof of God. And a third philosophical concept is that to really understand God, you cannot put him within a time and place, and he can't be made of parts. He can't be a composite, because any composite that we experience in reality has to be put together by something. So God must be an absolute unity and not be made of parts. And the Rambam regarded, well, he first of all says to know rather than believe, but he regarded to know about God to be gained through wisdom and scientific principles that display a God's handwriting across the universe as the most sure way of building within oneself a concept of God. He rejected the idea of superstitions and other other means of faith that were perhaps shaky, or so he he demands that your belief in God should be reached through study and reason. He posited that faith without reason is weak and it can be shaken by your personal doubts or external influences. Secondly, and most important probably, is he believed the highest form of worship is trying to understand God, trying in our human efforts to understand God. The more one tries to grasp God's divine wisdom, the closer you become to God. And I personally have this view that we talked about earlier when we were preparing this episode, that Rambam's emphasis on our building the perfect Jew or perfect human being is an amalgamation of many different things, including a knowledge of science. He states in Mishnah Torah about the almost requirement, obligation to have a rudimentary understanding of physics and nature, to see firsthand with our eyes evidence. We must, if we're trying to believe in something or gain knowledge in something, the primary focus should be evidence. And if we can observe through nature and through geometry and through things that have substance, we can see God's handwriting. And this is very important. I believe that our life is like an examination. attitudes and intentions, but also it is also an examination of how much we wish to look for God around us. And if we look at science and we look at the universe, we can see God's handiwork. And I believe an examination sometimes has coursework to do. And things that Rambam stressed as most important was obviously to keep halacha, to live according to the Torah, but not most importantly, but additionally to have an understanding, or rudimentary, as much as we feel we can do, of an understanding of science, because it's like a chunk of examination marks that we must, that I feel we must achieve to build ourselves up to be the best Jew and human being we can be. So that's one attitude. Before we move on to other perspectives, one way that is a very easy way to do this coursework is to make a study of what's called the God's ratios, the divine ratio. We know that nature has inbuilt throughout its systems particular ratios, like the Fibonacci series of mathematical proportions. And we see that we observe this in the construct of spirals. I believe that energy, and you see in the curl of a wave, the Fibonacci spiral. You see,
we should spell Fibonacci so people can look it up.
Fibonacci is spelled Fibonacci, and this is a sequence. It's a series of numbers where each term is the sum of the two preceding numbers, like 0, 1, 1, 2, 2, 3. 3 plus 2 is 5. 3 plus 5 is 8. 8 plus 5 is 13, etc. And when these numbers are used to construct spirals, they resemble seashells, they resemble hurricanes from above, and they also represent and visualize galaxies. So from the very maximum macro structures of the universe down to the tiniest seashells and other conical shapes are represented with exactly the same ratio. It's so prevalent in the universe. On top of that, you have things like in trees. You look at the common tree. It has a trunk, and then it has a system of how best to spread its branches, how the branches grow. Now, they grow at a fixed circuit of 137 degrees from, let's say, north.
Yeah.
The next branch will be 137 degrees from there. The next branch will sprout another 137 degrees. And that's because you get the maximum spread of the branches and thus the leaves to obtain energy through sunlight. And this, every tree you see will have the same ratio, the same effect. And once you familiarize yourself with these divine, they're called divine because they're from God, these divine ratios, when you're walking in the park, you see things very differently. You suddenly appreciate, you see God's handiwork when you're walking in the park. And that's a beautiful thing. If you want to keep your mind pure and in consonance with God, just look at his handiwork. And this is really important. You see it in human anatomy. The ratio between different parts of the human body, such as the length of the forearm to the hand, approximates what they call phi, which is this ratio, the golden ratio. Phyllotaxis, which I mentioned earlier, is the arrangements of leaves around a stem, and this is based on that system. Animal proportions. You see the spiral pattern in snail shells, nautilus shells, and they all adhere to this golden ratio. So this is very important. This recurrence of this ratio is it suggests a deep mathematical order, and some would interpret this as intentional design.
Absolutely. You know, they say the word for nature, which is hateva, is the same gematria as Elokim.
Yes, I've heard
So,
that. Yeah. So let's look at some other very important scholars and their interpretation of um, the existence of God, or proof of the existence of God. Let's look at Maimonides, Ramban, who lived from 1194 to 1270. And he looked at things very differently from the Rambam. He didn't reject the rational approach, but he suggested that God's existence is more powerfully demonstrated through historical events, and particularly miracles and divine intervention. So the Rambam says, just look at or read, or we were all there, at the Exodus from Egypt, and what more proof could you want? Um, he doesn't see miracles as violations of nature, but he sees it as demonstrations of how God intervenes in our human existence. He in his commentary on the Torah, he stresses that the miracles such as the splitting of the Red Sea and the plagues in Egypt are public revelations of God's direct intervention and involvement in our affairs. He critiqued philosophical endeavors to prove the existence of God, saying that they were abstract and perhaps limited. And this is actually a good point. We talked about this before, that perhaps, sometimes if I'm reading Guide to the Perplexed, I get perplexed by the logical, philosophical arguments. And it's, like everybody's different. We all have different structures of our brain and ways of thinking and analyzing. And to some people, perhaps the philosophical, logical steps of one source are difficult to comprehend. And at the end of the day, we want to be convinced about the existence of God. And if it's to be done in the theory of Ramban as opposed to Rambam, that's fine as well. So, Ramban also believed in Hashgacha Pratit, which states that even natural occurrences are kind of orchestrated by divine intervention.
it's like it says I can't remember which Gemara says this, but it says there's no blade of grass that grows without Hashem telling it to grow. I think through an angel, but Hashem tells it to grow. So I think the idea there, like you said, there's no independence of anything in existence that's independent from Hashem.
Yeah. I think you can even go so far to say, according to Ramban, Maimonides, every beat of your heart is controlled by God. And it's under the same umbrella of thought. We'll move on to Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, who was born in 1075 and died in 1141. And he wrote an amazing work, the Kuzari, and he was more aligned to Nachmanides in his non-rationalist leanings, and he even critiqued in the Kuzari the Maimonidean approach that Judaism or rather the belief in God is better attained through logical reasoning. He says that he opposes that and says, no, Judaism is not a philosophical system, and it's a religion that's based on divine revelation. So he posited that the Sinai, the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai, is the foundation of faith. and the ultimate proof of God's existence. He thought that philosophical arguments rely on abstract reasoning, which is true, but the events on Mount Sinai provide empirical evidence of God's reality. Again, he was like Maimonides, who thought that the philosophical approach was sometimes overly intellectualized and removed from most people's reality, which is a fair point because it's a difficult subject. And he argues that philosophical speculation about God sometimes leads to uncertainty and not really, and skepticism. So the way that Rabbi Yehuda Halevi differs from Maimonides is that he believes that faith is best grounded in direct revelation rather than philosophical and abstract intellectual arguments. Another scholar that we'd look at for his arguments for the existence of God is Rabbi Sadir Gaon, who lived about 100 years earlier than the Rambam and was an influence on him. And he was actually very aligned with the Rambam's thinking. And he stated, he was one of the earliest Jewish rationalist thinkers. And he also said that belief in God should be founded on reason. But he also added some theology and some, he believed an instruction about morals was also divine. Our laws, which Rambam didn't really mention specifically in his own theories, and he wrote a book called The Book of Beliefs and Opinions, Emunot V'Deot, and he had a treatise of 4 proofs regarding God's existence, and they were as follows. The first one was an argument from creation, which is the Kalam, cosmological argument. He's posited that the world had a beginning, so therefore it must have had a creator. The second argument is the argument of design. So he said the complexity and order of the universe points to an intelligent designer. And this is actually a very modern argument that a lot of people have, Jewish or not Jewish, about the concept of intelligent design or the fine-tuned universe. So I want to just give an overview over a modern interpretation of this philosophy. So this argument suggests that the fundamental physical constants and forces in the universe are precisely set to allow for the existence of life. Any slight deviation at all in any of these fundamental forces, even by a tiniest of a fraction, would render the universe uninhabitable. And some examples of these fine-tunings are the gravitational constant, which is if gravity was slightly stronger or weaker, the stars wouldn't have formed and would have probably collapsed had they formed very, very quickly. Also, the cosmological constant, which I think was proposed by Einstein. Here, the energy density of space is balanced in a way that it allows for the expansion of the universe. Perhaps if it was slightly different, it would collapse very quickly or not existed at all. Also, the ratio of electromagnetic force to gravity. If this ratio was altered, atoms probably wouldn't have formed correctly. And that would have prevented the emergence of complex life. Also, the carbon resonance in nuclear physics, which is carbon, which is an essential element for life. It forms under extremely specific conditions in stars, conditions that appear to be precisely calibrated. So those are some examples of fine-tuning, and even scientists who, a lot of, you'd assume that a lot of scientists are atheists, or a lot of them.
Some of them still are.
Some of them maybe still are, but a lot of them perhaps point to there must be a God. How can this be so? How can so many factors come together so precisely that we can exist?
The odds are staggering. The odds are absolutely
yes, exactly,
as near to impossible as you can get.
Absolutely. So going back to Rabbi Sajja Gaon, that was the argument from design. He argued that the complexity and order of the universe pointed to an intelligent designer. He also had a very similar argument to Rambam from him, because he lived earlier, at an earlier age, about the argument from contingency, that everything is in existence depends on something else. Therefore, there must have been an original prime mover and self-sufficient being, which he says is God. Of course. And he had one final argument in his treatise, which is a moral argument. He said that the existence of moral law implies a divine lawgiver. So we have one more type of sect. We look at Hasidism, the Baal Shem Tov, and Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, and the Tanya.
The Balatanya.
And they shifted the focus from intellectual proofs of God existence to experiential faith and what is called divine immanence. So in the Hasidic thought teaches that God is actively recreating the universe at every moment. This is the Chiddush of B'chol Yom Tamid. They have a concept of, the Tanya explains that God is not just a distant creator, but is present in all existence. This idea is rooted in a concept called panentheism, which states that belief that the world is within God, but God still transcends it.
That's also, like not an irony, a paradox.
Paradox, yes. But there's God is unique, so it allows for that. Also, the idea of emuna peshuta, or simple faith, states that one's relationship with God is not built on an intellectual investigation, but on a more emotional and heartfelt connection. This could be very true, obviously, because God is within all of us, in our hearts. And if sometimes we feel God more in our hearts than through intellectual investigation. And also, as we know, the Hasidic movement has the role of the tzaddik, or righteous leader, to serve as a conduit for divine energy in this world. And that helps some people connect to God beyond rational thoughts.
Yeah, we've always relied on that, but as opposed to worshipping the leader himself, which is of course heresy. You realise he is a channel.
Yes,
probably a conduit. A better word would be an oracle. Yeah. I heard that once. Yeah. An oracle. I think that's what the Erev Rav wanted to replace when they thought that Moshe Rabbeinu wasn't coming back. They said, we need that connection. We can't do it directly. We need to have this conduit. So they chose something which didn't have free will, which was the Egel Azav, as opposed to a leader who, a tzaddik who could give them the connection, but it was again through the medium of free will. So anyway.
So to conclude this episode, we see that there are various perspectives that we can look at that give examples of this first principle, which is to understand and to know the existence of God. We see the Rambam demands that we investigate and study, look at, take in divine wisdom and become closer to God. Ramban Maimonides says, look at our history, study the miracles, and realize this is God's hand in our world. Rabbi Yehuda Halevi insists that the direct revelation of Mount Sinai is stronger than perhaps abstract philosophy. Rabbi Sajid Gaon, he is a blend of rationalism and Jewish theology, quite akin to Maimonides, and Hasidic thought moves away from philosophy to rely on divine immanence and a more lived emotional experience for their conception of God. And yeah, so that wraps up the first principle. And yeah, we look forward to the next principle next week.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Michael. That was a lot to go through. My own personal advice to anyone listening to this share is, when you finish, go back to the beginning, go over it again, because there's a lot of material here that you may not really absorb at first blush. So for me, it's a lot to take in. So thank you very much, Michael. Please, God, will see you next time with the second principle. Until then, Baruch Adonai L'olam. Amen v'amen.